And at the trial, the states or the USA Corporation's expert admitted that, yeah, they did DNA testing on the rifle, found no DNA. And, well, then they lied and said, well, we didn't have his DNA. They said, we didn't collect his DNA. Well, no, but they've already got it on file from Tipton County, so it's in the national database. They've got it there, so.
Okay, so you just heard Mike speaking about the DNA evidence in his federal criminal trial. That's the one where he flies off to Nebraska. And he says that there was no DNA found. No, correction. He says that the FBI said that there was no DNA found on the gun. Now, let's go to transcripts and see what was actually said. Now, this is Special Agent Zapluski being interviewed, cross-examined by Shenzi, who is Michael's public offender. I'm going to start here because you can see that Shenzi really busted his ass trying to get Mike off the charges. So they're talking about DNA evidence, blah, blah, blah. And they're talking about the optic, which is like the thing you look at on the rifle. All right, so where is the optic right now today? This is Shenzi. Answer, it's on the cart, if I'm not mistaken. Question, all right, now, there was DNA analysis on the weapon, true? Answer, yes. And what were the results of that analysis? There, I submitted various items for DNA. Shenzi, I just wanted to talk strictly about the gun, just a firearm. What were the results of the DNA analysis? Answer, the lab obtained DNA, so right here Mike is lying. He said that they didn't find DNA on the gun. That's not true. They actually did find DNA on the gun. Answer, the lab obtained DNA, however, we could not compare it because we weren't able to obtain DNA from the person suspected of having that same profile. He's talking about Mike here. What are the results to indicate that? There was an FBI lab report. So there was no DNA, and there's nothing of any significance in the DNA analysis. I wouldn't say that. I would say that the analysis is significant when the lab is able to compare a known sample against the profile, but there is no DNA analysis linking anything to Mr. Parsons. Isn't that true? Answer, yes. So contrary to what Mike says, it's not that there was no DNA found on the gun. It's that the DNA that was found on the gun couldn't be compared to Mike's DNA. And they're going to get into that. Then Shenzi gets into whether or not there were any fingerprints on the gun. No. Was that attempted? No. Our lab prefers either DNA or fingerprints, but the testing methods allow for one, but not both. So Shenzi here does a very good job. It shows he points out that they didn't find Mike's fingerprints on the gun because they couldn't, and that the DNA wasn't able to be linked to Mike. So he's going for like a reasonable doubt thing. What is interesting is that Shenzi did use the phrase "there was no DNA," but that wasn't true. Maybe in Mike's mind, he only heard that and assumes it to be true. But I don't think that's the case either. I don't think he's that stupid. We'll get to the full story here. Anyways, after Shenzi is done, Sharp, which is the prosecutor, gets to redirect. I'm going to hand you this that's been marked as Exhibit 4. Can you identify what that is? This appears to be the scope that was removed from the top of the rifle. All right. Question. I understood your testimony on cross to be that you can do fingerprinting or you could do DNA, but you can't do both. What's the reason for that? Shenzi objects on foundation of hearsay. This is a pattern throughout the case. If Shenzi is objecting at every turn, trying to get evidence thrown out, he really busts his ass trying to get Mike off the charges, which is really ironic because before, during, and after the trial, Mike has been trashing Shenzi constantly, even though Shenzi did probably the best possible job ever, and all for free. That Shenzi is a public defender. Mike didn't have to pay for it. Anyways, Spolsky continues. Whatever testing is utilized is that they prefer one or the other. Basically, they can either do fingerprinting or DNA. That's not the. In this case, you would ask for DNA analysis of the gun. Is that correct? Answer yes. And I understood your testimony to be that you indicated there was a specimen or DNA detected, but there was nothing to compare it to. Is that correct? Question: did you have a DNA sample of Michael Parsons? Answer: no. So the reason they were not able to say that Mike's DNA was on the gun is that they didn't have a DNA sample. Question: did you pursue getting a DNA sample for Mr. Parsons? Yes. In what respect? We had asked the United States Marshal Service at the time to attempt to obtain what's called a buccal swab. It's a swab DNA that's required at the time of processing in the federal system. Have you been present at all of Mr. Parsons' hearings? During any of the court hearings that you attended, has he expressed any resistance to providing physical samples? Shenzi objects again. Can you explain? Answer: Mr. Parsons has been resistant to providing basic testing that's required of processing, whether it would be fingerprints, DNA, or even tuberculosis testing. So the reason they weren't able to compare the DNA on the gun to Mike's DNA is that he refused to give a DNA sample, and he also refused to give fingerprints. I'm guessing it probably forces them to get those. But it says a lot, because if Mike really thought that the gun was planted, he could just give a copy of his DNA. They'd see that the DNA on the gun isn't Mike's DNA, and that would be reasonable doubt or whatever. But obviously Mike has to refuse to give DNA because he knows that it's his DNA on the gun. It's his gun. At some point in time, did you decide to drop the pursuit of DNA analysis? Yes. Why is that? Because the trace came back from alcohol, tobacco, firearms that we had submitted on the serial number of the weapon. This is explained elsewhere in the trial. Basically, they were able to prove that Mike had purchased the gun from some other guy. So there's no need to do DNA analysis when you know that Mike is the owner of the weapon. Were you able to locate some witnesses that eliminated the need for DNA? Yes. They're talking about the guy that sold the gun to Mike testified. So once they have that witness, they don't need DNA. Finally, we on the topic of DNA, we get the conclusion to the. If you've listened to the courtroom audio where Mike is ordered to take TB test, Mike says that he's going to resist to the death any attempt to get tested for tuberculosis. But we don't find out what the result of that is. Now we get the story of how that went. Did you and fellow deputies take Mr. Parsons to a local facility here in Omaha for the purpose of a blood draw? Answer: yes, we had a court order to do so. So on that day, I presume, yes, we transported him to a facility with the purpose of drawing blood. Question: yes. And to be fair, that was pursuant to a court order? Yes, it was. And so you were just performing your duties? Correct. Do you remember where you took Mr. Parsons? I can't remember. How many? You and I have not previously discussed that. Testimony is fair? Yes. So I apologize for calling you cold on this, so I want to make that known, but you and fellow deputies took Mr. Parsons for the purpose of a blood draw? Answer: yes. Did all of the deputies go in with Mr. Parsons? Yes. And can you tell us what happened inside to the best of your recollection? We escorted... This is where we go. That's good. We escorted Mr. Parsons from our prisoner van into the facility. When we got into the facility, at the threshold of the door, he became combative and resisted. He would not walk on his own, so we had to forcibly pull him into the clinic and forcibly take him into a room, forcibly put him down in a chair, where at that point, the four of us attempted to hold him down while he was yelling, screaming, and being resistant to our lawful verbal commands to stop to attempt to draw blood, and a medical medical personnel staff was there to attempt to draw the blood. At that point in time, we were not successful in getting the blood draw because he would not stay still long enough for the nurse to do it. And ultimately, was there a blood draw? Yes, we kind of prepared for that. We had brought a restraint chair with us, which is a special chair that the U.S. Marshal Service uses, and we transferred him from the restraint chair, or from the exam chair to the restraint chair. We physically tied him down, strapped his arms, legs, and strapped everything down so he could not move. We still held him down, and then at that point, we were able to keep him still enough so that the nurse or medical staff there could get a blood sample. And through those efforts, a blood draw and a blood sample was completed. To my knowledge, it was. What happened to the blood draw? I have no idea. I would assume it got sent to the whole test was for a TB test, which is standard procedure for anybody in custody. Was Mr. Parsons asserting that he was not subject to a blood draw? Yes. Sharp gets to cross-examine. The blood draw was for a test for tuberculosis. Is that correct? Does the marshal's office get called to collect samples for DNA? Yes. Is that correct? That's done by using swabs to basically swish around someone's mouth and then put it in a tube. Is that correct? Was that done in March of this year with Mr. Parsons? Not as far as I know, no. Okay, so you didn't have a court order for collection of DNA in March of this year, is that correct? As far as I know, there was no court order for DNA, and I did not take any DNA. Actually, I kind of think that's wrong. I think they did get a court order for DNA. I'm not aware of anybody else taking DNA, to my knowledge. So basically, because they didn't take his DNA, they weren't able to compare the DNA on the gun. So the idea, Mike's claim that there was no DNA on the gun is not true.